Our mateys, join us now as we sail the high seas of PBS to learn more about pirates through video games. I'm Elise Willems.
I'm Nicole Zavalich.
And we are joined by Dr. Rebecca Simon, who is an expert in, would you say piratology? Is that an actual field?
Pirate historian is real.
Yes, what's the name we're looking at?
Piratology could work, but I guess the official title would be a pirate historian.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. How does one become a pirate historian?
So I did history kind of all through college, graduated bachelor's in history, master's, and then I did my master's thesis about the history of piracy, and then I went on and did a PhD, and I wrote about public executions of pirates in the early modern Atlantic world, which is when all these games pretty much take place.
Okay.
So,
Is that considered the golden age of piracy, that time zone? Yeah.
yes.
And public executions is not something we have on our list of pirate myths, which we will be getting to today as they come up. We're playing Skull and Bones from Ubisoft, and we're going to see how accurate this is to what we know and what we think we know about pirates. Mostly from movies and TV and comics, etc. Do you run into that often where you're like, this is all wrong?
Quite often, and a lot of it is because we get a lot of pop culture stuff about pirates, and most of it actually comes from the novel Treasure Island. And that's where we get the idea of like our matey, X marks the spot, treasure hunting, and everything like that. And so most pop culture actually draws a lot from that novel because of how popular it was.
Robert Louis Stevenson was the problem, basically.
In a way, but it made people interested in pirates, so it makes the job pretty interesting. I kind of joke that my job is to disappoint people about pirates as we get into the real history. That's what history does, it's not as interesting as we often think, although sometimes it's so interesting we think it's fake. So it's like one or the other.
Right. And I feel like pirates is one of those ideas that the media really ran with.
Oh yeah, and it goes through phases probably where pirates are really hot.
It does, yeah. It literally, like, no pun intended, it ebbs and flows, where pirates will get really popular and you don't hear about it very much, then really popular again. Like the show Black Sails ran from 2014, 2017, but during the pandemic it kind of sort of gained a cult following, and then Our Flag Means Death came out a couple years ago. And then oddly enough, kind of in between those time periods was when I was asked to write lots of articles about pirates and do lots of podcasts about pirates. So people get interested for a while and then it kind of dies down, but it always comes back.
Are pirates the hotness right now, would you say?
I think it's kind of like in the in-between stage, but I know when Our Flag Means Death was on, it was like really, really popular. And I think now that the second season finished and they canceled the show, it's kind of ebbing away a little bit, but it'll come back.
Well, mentioning Our Flag Means Death, a big part of that show was pirate romance. And maybe that's a good starting place.
Yeah.
You people love pirate romance, I know that.
Pirate love.
Pirate love.
It's interesting about Our Flag Means Death because, it had the pirate romance between Stede Bonnet and Blackbeard, and they were both very real pirates, and they did sail together. But in real life, they didn't have a romance. They actually didn't like each other, and Blackbeard in particular had no respect for Stede Bonnet because Bonnet wasn't that great of a pirate. And it actually ended up being Blackbeard who betrays Bonnet to the authorities, whereas in the show it was actually kind of vice versa. And so I could see why people got really into that. Like, it's like a unique romance, it's a queer romance, and it is fun, and it's, really cool representation in that way. But, as a historian, sometimes I'm like, well, I wish they kind of made like fictional pirates for that.
Just to explore the notion of pirate romance at large, right? Because people are on these ships for long periods of time, and sexuality is fluid. So like, how did romance exist, if at all?
That's always like a really interesting subject, and a lot of people love asking about that or talking about that. And the annoying answer with that is that we don't really know. What we do know is that some pirates, like Blackbeard, who was actually named Edward Teach, he had a rule on a ship that you could not have any romantic relationships. In fact, in his specific rules, called the Articles, it specifically says no women or boys allowed on the ship, which is interesting that he mentions boys, and we don't know exactly what that context is, but when he's mentioning women, it's possible it could mean young male prostitutes, or it could just simply mean like, women don't have the skills, in my opinion, therefore boys won't either. It could mean quite a few things.
Or like the Greek way, where it's like,
the
Greeks had like wives and then they had like a younger guy.
Right, it could be that too. But pirates did practice something called matelotage, and this didn't happen very often, but what it was sort of like a civil union between pirates, and some people believe that it was essentially kind of gay marriage, but what the point of matelotage...
They were roommates.
Roommates. We're roommates at sea.
But the purpose of matelotage was to make it so that way if you died, what you earned could legally go to someone who you choose, who either they could keep it, or if the pirate had family on shore, it could make sure to go back to their family. Sometimes there was speculation that maybe it was because they were, extremely close friends, as it's often looked at in documents, possibly a romantic relationship. It's not unusual for there to be what they call situational homosexuality in a place where you're in very confined quarters for a very long time and very, very, very close together. So it is possible that that would happen. But in the 17th and 18th centuries, the idea of homosexuality, the way we determine it, the way we think of it in terms of like a romantic relationship and an orientation, that wasn't really a concept the way we define it back then. It was considered kind of a peculiarity in terms of tastes, is kind of how they would
Well,
put
for
it.
Blackbeard to have the rule to avoid that must mean that it was happening.
Yeah, it was. And women in particular, there's this idea, oh, women were bad luck on ships, that's why we don't bring them. It's actually not really the case. Women, for the most part, they weren't brought on ships because they were deemed to be not physically, mentally, or emotionally capable of handling life at sea.
So then where did these superstitions come from? Because there were probably lots of other superstitions
Oh
too,
yeah,
right?
there were lots, and there actually are lots of female tropes within the superstitions. You have superstitions of mermaids and sirens who would lure pirates into the sea and then they would drown. Sailors are scared of drowning, and so they have lots of mythology kind of warning against these dangers. But what's also interesting is that the ship, their home, what they need to survive, is also referred to with female pronouns. So
Right.
there is kind of like this almost like maternal respect that they have. But there were women actually quite often on ships in general. Captains could bring their wives, or officers could bring their
Really?
wives. Yeah, there were some women who were passengers, even on merchant ships. There were some women who were in charge of food or nursing. We don't really see that on pirate ships very much, but it did exist.
So what happens when they are out at sea, you are kidnapping people? What happens if you kidnap women?
So if you kidnap women, a lot of times they would be kind of held as hostage and either be at very high risk of violence or sexual assault, or sometimes they'll actually be treated better, because they're the fairer sex, and so they might be given some better food, put into a better place below the hold. So it really varied.
So there wasn't necessarily a stigma or superstition about having women on the ships. That just kind of evolved from like women would not want to be on these ships.
Right, yeah. So not really so much like superstitions against them. It's just more like it was felt that they would cause problems.
Were there other superstitions?
There were so many superstitions about death that could happen at sea. Mythical creatures.
Do you guys want to help me pick
Yeah,
a
what are you
character?
doing right now? Oh, you're creating your character.
Yeah, so I would love your guys' input. We're
making a
going to be a woman. yeah.
Yeah.
But it's just kind of like, which woman do we want to be? Her?
And pirate ships were super diverse, so anyone would work.
Look, a survivor!
Harry, the British fleet must still be near.
Take my hand. You're not dying today.
Okay, so this is the first main female character of this game. Right off the bat, she's got jewelry. She's got a tube top. Let's talk about the accuracy of this outfit.
Having a tube top, that sort of thing, that's probably for the sake of the game. What the man is wearing right there, that's a pretty accurate outfit that a sailor would be wearing. Clothing is going to get really worn away at sea with the humidity and the heat and the salty air and everything like that. And you're going to want something that's going to cover as much skin as possible.
So was there a dress code?
No, there wasn't a dress code, but people dressed in a way that was really practical on ship, especially if you were a general member of the crew. So she's wearing a tube top, she's not protected from the sun. So that's not accurate. She's going to want to be fully protected because, you're going to be sunburned constantly, no matter what complexion you are with just the amount of sunlight you're getting. So what he's wearing, kind of baggy pants, which are really roomy, able for him to move around quite a bit. They're also dark. That's also very common, and that's usually because a lot of clothing was sort of dyed dark in order to hide any sort of injuries, sometimes covered in tar to give you extra sun protection. Pirates did wear things like jewelry, so she was wearing a necklace. That's pretty accurate. Pirates, if they captured goods or jewels or something, they would wear a lot of stuff that they stole.
You gotta
kind of
flaunt
show,
it.
yeah, exactly. So the jewelry is quite accurate. The tattoos that they had were also very accurate. Sailors oftentimes would have tattoos as a way to identify themselves in case they went missing or died in battle or something like that.
Oh, yeah, you're not really carrying a real ID at sea.
Right. And it could be risky for a pirate to have a tattoo, but the thing is, what I often tell people is that, not all sailors were pirates, but all pirates were sailors. most of them came from some sort of sailing background, so stands to reason why a lot might have tattoos.
So we could say no dress code,
No.
but probably no tube tops.
No tube
No,
tops.
no, not practical at all whatsoever.
And it's interesting that you mentioned the sun, because I've never really thought about this, but was there any kind of archaic sunscreen or anything that they put on to try to protect themselves
You
in that
know,
way?
a lot of times what people would do, I think in certain climates, if it was available, they might put mud on their skin for certain amounts of protection. I know that there were actually some places where they might put some sort of oil on their skin. And oftentimes what they would do as well is they would actually take some sort of eye makeup, literally dark eye makeup, and you put it under your eyes.
Like a baseball, football player.
Exactly. It reflects the sun away from your eyes. It's almost like sunglasses in a way.
We've just, it would appear, Nicole, you're on an island?
I just landed on a little island, and I want to flag that I'm in a tube top again. So that's 2 women in tube top. Like, there's never been a year where tube tops made sense.
It's for the game.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's
like,
for the game, and I will be writing to Ubisoft.
yeah, they're gonna hear about this.
So he's dressed pretty well. He might be an officer. Pirate officers generally dressed a lot better because they want to show their rank.
Yeah,
And
more
so-
buttons, more prestige is how I see
Yeah,
it.
how many epaulets?
Yeah.
And they'll be dressed very similar to other officers on non-pirate ships as well.
Well, when you look at a pirate in a movie and they're wearing a velvet coat or they've got a ton of ruffles, they're a captain, like Captain Hook, I think, being the. Was that something that any generation of pirates would have access to in terms of like materials or clothing, or would that even be practical to wear on a pirate ship?
Some pirates would dress that way, but it was usually kind of reserved for more upper ranking members of the ship. But a lot of pirates, you know, if they were able to steal clothing like that, they'd wear it to kind of show off what they were able to win. And it was also very fashionable for the time. If they're going to go on land, the more respectable you look, the less suspicion you might get, or, you know, people won't pay as much attention to you if, you know, look quite respectable. The ruffles on the clothing, you know, that was very standard style for like the 18th century in particular. So yeah, velvets, fine cloth, textiles have always been like the number one item people would always trade for, going back to the ancient world.
Silk Road.
Yeah, exactly. Like going back, you know, to ancient Babylonia, Mesopotamia, people were looking for it because oftentimes the textiles, you're limited to what you have available. So stuff like velvet is fancy, it's expensive. If you wear it, it makes you look really good.
So there was like no concern about you're showing off this jewelry, your trinkets, you're showing off this great clothing that you've plundered. Like there was no concern of this draws a target on your back.
No, if anything, it actually made you look more intimidating because you're showing off how successful you are.
And that's actually kind of the basis of every pirate video game, is how much
Accumulate.
notoriety.
Yeah.
And that's pretty accurate to the reality.
That's wild.
Yeah.
This kind of island outpost, was that a thing?
Yeah, it was. So a lot of pirate ships, what they would do is most of them are actually on the smaller side, so that way they could be faster and you could maneuver into more shallow spaces than larger ships.
Wait, so like the idea of like the bigger your ship, the more powerful you are wasn't a thing?
Well, that was a thing, but a pirate having a huge ship was more the exception rather than the rule.
Oh, okay.
So it's pretty common for pirates, what they do is they'll go into little island areas and stop on an island for a brief period of time. And that's usually to like do any sort of repairs for the ship, scrape off any barnacles below. It's a chance for you to just kind of rest and maybe get on land for a little bit. So that wasn't too uncommon to spend a few days on an island like that if you were able to.
Would there be any like fun or festivities on this island? Like,
Yeah, sometimes. So what we did is we saw that they were like kind of passed out. They were drinking. You saw lots of bottles. That is very realistic. Pirates would often steal lots of alcohol, wines and rum and other things, and they would drink it. And a lot of times it was a way to celebrate what they were able to take from ships. Most sailors drank very copiously. So it's not unique to pirates to drink a lot. And a lot of times it was because of boredom at sea, or it was just very available.
And why was it so available? Did they just stock up all these ships?
So when you're sailing through the Caribbean, you know, you've got all the sugar plantation islands. You're making rum. And so rum was very cheap in a way, and it was really plentiful, and you can make it really good quality. You can make cheap quality. And so it was really common to have rum on a ship as kind of a treat. Oftentimes you might have a beverage, something like grog, which was real. It was parts water, parts rum with some lime and some sugar. And that was a really popular drink to have. And sometimes they might put some alcohol in water to make the water actually more drinkable. Wines, people are often trying to steal wines because you could sell it for a high price, but also it's like really good quality alcohol you'll be drinking.
Okay, so we didn't even have like pirates, you know, drinking on our list. So that would be that would be
That's on
a
us.
factual like
Oh, yeah,
pirates
it's super
they liked-
realistic.
And would they have a preference? Because like the lime and sugar drink you just described sounds really nice.
That's generally what they were kind of after, because people didn't quite understand where diseases came from, but people were able to figure out patterns. And scurvy was a huge risk at sea. If you get scurvy, it's a lack of vitamin C. Your teeth get loose, you bleed a lot easier, your eyes get sunken in, you get sores. Eventually, there was kind of this correlation between citrus fruits and not getting scurvy. You can dry the fruits, you can put them into a beverage, you can consume them in all kinds of ways. So that's why they would put things like limes or lemons or oranges, if it was available, into their drinks.
Pirates are always going over to the Florida area, and that's where oranges are.
It's where oranges are, but also in 1715, there was a massive wreck of what's called the Spanish treasure fleet. Spanish ships carried tons of gold and silver coming from their colonies in Central and South America. And then there was a huge storm, and a whole fleet of these massive Spanish ships crashed off the shore of Florida, and gold and silver was washing up on shore for years. So pirates became really attracted.
For years?
For years. Wow. Yeah, I think people are still excavating some of the ships, such as the Urca de Lima. That's the most famous one because it was the most intact. In fact, that is probably the big plot point of Black Sails, is getting to the Urca de Lima after they hear about this big crash.
Thanks for the goods. Scarelock may well spare my head.
Nicole, did you just sell him firepower, or what did you?
So I just sailed around in my tiny ship looking for nails, planks, firearms, floating bottles of alcohol.
That's really accurate to look for that sort of stuff from ships or a shipwreck. Because,
scavenging.
Yeah, you want to find stuff that you can use to repair your own ship. In fact, about 50% of what pirates would steal was just to replenish their own stores. So in a lot of ways, this is why pirate ships were in better condition, why they wore better clothing, why they had better food, because they're constantly able to replenish by pillaging other ships. So half of it is to be able to sell or pay yourself, the other half repair the ship.
Just put it back into the business.
Exactly.
The very first word of this game is like the dawn of capitalism. Are pirates and capitalism just kind of like tied together?
There are some, like I know some economic historians who do kind of examine that. This is kind of a period of more mercantilism that kind of dates back even further. It's kind of like we're in the transition point between mercantilism and capitalism, and it's all about kind of like, making these profits. They're going after cash crops, throughout the colonies. And pirates are also wanting to take advantage of this. They're wanting to get goods to sell them to get rich themselves. And this is a time period where people are coming to the colonies to make money for themselves. I think it also is in the 1700s when Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations, which started capitalism, basically. A little bit later than this. But yeah, some argue that you could call this kind of like the early stages of capitalism.
So what are we looking at then as the era of pirates, or is there a singular era that we can point to?
There is. It's called the Golden Age of Piracy, and this is a period of time between like 1650-ish until about 1730. And this is kind of done in like three sections. In the 1650s to 70s, you have a lot of French pirates who are attacking Spanish ships, and a lot of British pirates attacking Spanish ships, because there's a lot of political contention in the Caribbean. The Spanish are extremely powerful, probably the most powerful nation in Europe at this time through their colonization, and so other countries are trying to become just as powerful, if not more. And Britain in particular is fighting against Spain to get plantation islands. Spain had driven a lot of French pirates out where they were, so a lot of them kind of worked against the Spanish, but also these pirates spent a lot of time on land hunting animals, and that's why they're called buccaneers. It comes from the French word boucanier, which basically sort of means roasting meat, so that's what they were known
no
for.
way.
Yeah.
Are we learning something on PBS? The idea of pirates hunting blows my mind.
Exactly. That's why it was so unusual, and that's why they were specifically kind of identified with that. And then you have a second round, which actually is not in the Caribbean. It's the East Indian Ocean and Red Sea, where you have British pirates in that region in the 1690s, like Henry Avery, Captain Kidd, and they're terrorizing the Indian Mughals, the elite merchant class. And this is when the British East India Company is at the height, and it's growing. It's the biggest corporation in human history, basically, worth trillions in modern day currency.
So much like trade happening.
Oh, yeah. And then piracy goes on pause at the turn of the 18th century because of a war called the War of Spanish Succession. And a lot of pirates were given pardons if they agreed to fight for the governments. And they were known as privateers because they're pirates, contracted pirates for a government. And the third era is the most famous, and that's after the end of the war. These privateers go back to being pirates, and this is where your Blackbeard, Benjamin Hornigold, Jack Rackham, Anne Bonny, Mary Read, Charles Vane, Sam Bellamy. A lot of them are veterans of this war, or at least they know each other. So this is the most organized period of piracy. And some argue this is the only time in history where we have true pirates because they're sailing for themselves, not for another government.
I
for the most part.
I feel like we have barely scratched the surface of pirates, of our list of myths and misconceptions. So Rebecca, you're going to come back and play more with us and talk more about pirates. In the meantime, where can people find you and your work?
So you can check my website, which is rebecca-simon.com, and that's where I've got links to kind of like a lot of my articles and podcasts that I've been on. You can also find links to my books. My most recent book is called The Pirate's Code: Laws and Life Aboard Ship. You can also find me on TikTok. My username there is Pirate Beckalex, Beckalex.
If you like this, you'll get all kinds of bite-sized pirate facts,
Tons.
right?
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for watching Won't You Be My Gamer. Please like and subscribe to support the show. I'm Elise Willems.
I'm Nicole Zavalich.
We'll see you next time.